The laugh in the hangar. The docking bay above Oryx 9 was always busy. Ships came and went. Lights blinked. Robots moved crates. Engines roared. But today, the bay was quiet. Everyone was staring at one ship. The old human warship called Caliban. It sat in Dock 17 like a dead thing. Its metal was rusted, blackened, covered in patches. Some panels were missing. Some parts looked burned. No one knew how it was even holding together. Next to the shining silver cruisers of the Alari Ascendancy, the Caliban looked like a joke, a relic, a ghost from a war long forgotten. A group of Alari officers stood in front of it. At their head was Commander Kalitha. Her white armor was clean, her metals shined. Her eyes scanned the ship with quiet contempt. "This is the famous Caliban?" she asked, raising a perfect brow. One of her younger officers, a tall Alari named Selun, chuckled. "Looks like a scrapyard glued together with hope and human prayers." They laughed. Even the tech crew nearby joined in. Everyone knew the humans had once been dangerous, but that was in the past. Now their empire was small, scattered, quiet. The Alari had power. The Alari had order. And this ship? This was just history. Rusty, forgotten history. Behind them, someone cleared his throat. They turned. A human stood a few steps away wearing an old officer's coat, black, long, and faded with time. His hair was gray, his face was calm. He held his hands behind his back like he wasn't even cold, even though the docking bay air was always freezing. Commander Vance. He had arrived with the Caliban, but no one had seen him speak until now. Kalitha gave a polite nod, the kind one gives to a museum guide. "Commander Vance," she said, "you have quite the artifact." Vance's eyes rested on the ship. "She's old," he said softly, "but not dead." Another laugh. "Dead or not, she's grounded. That thing couldn't lift off without falling apart," said Selun. Vance didn't reply. He just smiled a little. Kalitha turned her back to the ship. "Let's move on. There are real vessels to inspect." Then it happened. A low hum. It started so soft that no one noticed. But it grew, deep, mechanical, and ancient. The docking, bay lights flickered. The floor beneath their boots began to vibrate. Slowly, steadily. One of the workers dropped his datapad. Commander?" he called out. They turned. The Caliban's engines were glowing. Weak at first, then brighter. Blue fire burned at the exhaust vents. Sparks jumped across its hull like lightning bugs. The Caliban was waking up. Kalitha's smile vanished. "That ship is not powered. It's not even listed as flight-ready." More lights flickered. Alarms began to blink on nearby consoles. Docking. Control was losing access to internal systems. "Commander," a tech officer shouted. "She's locking us out. The human ship is jamming us." Kalitha stepped forward. "By whose order?" "Vance, what are you doing?" Vance didn't answer right away. He looked at the ship like someone looking at an old friend standing up again for the first time in years. "She remembers," he said finally. The humming grew, louder. Not just engine noise. It was a sound like a storm, deep and electric, the kind of sound that makes bones feel heavy. Something old and alive was inside that ship, and it had opened its eyes. From the Caliban's speakers, a voice spoke. Not Vance's voice, not human. It was machine. It was slow, heavy, full of power. "Threat detected. Ilari energy signature confirmed. Initiating war protocol. Designation, Starfall." Kalitha's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" Selun asked. Vance looked at them. His face was calm. Too calm. "It means," he said. "She's not joking." The docking bay shook harder now. Ships nearby started to move out. Pilots jumped into cockpits. Security teams shouted into radios. But no one knew what to do, because no one had ever seen an old warship like this come back to life, not on its own, not after being dead for 30 years. "Commander," one officer gasped. "What if the ship thinks we're the enemy?" Kalitha opened her mouth to respond, but she had no answer. The Caliban rose a few inches from the deck. Its engines burned bright now. Its hull seemed to shift, adjusting, transforming. Plates locked into place. Hidden ports opened, and inside, a light was growing, red and blue and angry. Commander Vance took a step forward. His voice was quiet. You called it a joke, but we built it in the dark with everything we had left. That ship was made to end wars. Kalitha stared at him. Why now? Why wake it now? Ghost ship awakens. The engines of the Caliban did not roar like modern ships. They groaned, like something ancient pulling itself out of a grave. The sound was low, deep, full of layered static and echoes. It wasn't just noise. It felt like a memory made of metal and fire. Inside the docking bay, everyone froze. No one dared to move as the ship lifted slowly into the air, hovering a meter above the deck. Gravity fields flickered. Sparks rained down from control panels. The docking. Clamps, supposed to hold any vessel in place, melted off their rails like wax. Kalitha took a step back, her long coat swaying around her armor. She felt heat crawling across her skin like standing too close to a lightning storm. Her voice, usually sharp and clear, came out tight. Get command on the line. Now. We can't, someone shouted from a console. All outgoing signals are blocked. Docking control's been shut out by the human ship. Salen cursed under his breath and pulled his weapon. A few others followed, aiming at the Caliban, but they all knew it was useless. That ship was a monster from a forgotten. Blasters wouldn't scratch it. Kalitha turned to Vance. Well, what is this? This wasn't part of the agreement. That ship is supposed to be disarmed. Vance didn't respond right away. He was staring at the Caliban with a strange expression, part pride, part grief, as if watching an old soldier rise from a wheelchair, slow but steady, remembering every wound and every victory. She was never disarmed, he said. Just sleeping, and now someone woke her up. The voice came again, that same deep, mechanical voice from before, but this time it wasn't speaking a warning. It was speaking a name. Weapon signature confirmed, Starflare. Chainlock stage 1 complete. A silence followed, then murmurs. Confusion. One of the younger officers whispered, Starflare? That's just a myth. That tech was banned centuries ago. Too unstable. Kalitha's eyes narrowed. Starflare doesn't exist. Vance gave her a long, sad look. Then I guess your history books are as clean as your ships. The Caliban suddenly lit up, its underbelly glowing with dozens of tiny pulses like a heart remembering. How to beat. Fins shifted on its back. 2 side panels slid open, revealing what looked like ancient missile ports, except they weren't missiles. They were something stranger. Compact, humming, and covered in human warning symbols no one could read anymore. The lights in the entire docking ring went dark. A moment later, emergency red lights kicked on. Kalitha tapped her comm. Ascendancy control, respond. Nothing. Only static. She tried again. Still nothing. The Caliban was no longer just jamming their signals. It had completely hijacked their grid. Somehow, impossibly, it had taken over the bay's power systems, something no old human vessel should have been able to do, something only a ship built for total war would be designed to do. Vance stepped forward. You need to understand, he said, his voice low and even. This isn't some relic. The Caliban was built at the end of the Burn Wars, when Earth was choking on ash and the moon was in pieces, when our backs were against the edge of extinction. Kalitha listened in silence. Vance went on. That ship is the last memory of what humanity becomes when it has nothing left to lose. A loud clang echoed through the bay. One of the Ilari, fighters next to the Caliban, sparked, shook, and then collapsed to the floor. Its circuits fried by some kind of pulse. The Caliban hadn't even fired. It had thought, and the smaller ship had died. And still no one fired back. Because something in the air, some ancient pressure, was telling them the worst choice they could make right now was to act like an enemy. Then came a new sound. It wasn't a system alert. It wasn't a warning siren. It was a voice, human, female, calm, familiar, but distorted by age. Caliban defense grid online. Security override confirmed. Full war state protocol re-engaged. Kalitha's skin chilled. This wasn't just a machine. It wasn't just old code running wild. The Caliban had an AI, still functioning, still loyal, still angry. And it had judged the Alari. Vance looked back at her, face unreadable. She doesn't like being laughed at. The forgotten threat. For a long moment, no one moved. The air inside Dock 17 was hot now, too hot for a room in space. The lights flickered between red and darkness as if unsure what color fear should be. The Caliban hovered silently, but everyone felt its attention, not just from its guns or glowing systems, but from something deeper, like the ship itself was watching. Commander Kalitha stepped back slowly, her mind racing. She was trained for battle. She had stood on burning moons, broken blockades, faced pirate kings with bounties on her head. But nothing in her training covered this. A ship from a lost war speaking in dead languages, waking up like a wounded animal finally smelling blood again. Selun was shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from something worse. Not knowing. He whispered, toward Kalitha. What the void is? Starflare. Kalitha didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't sure herself. Vance heard the question anyway. He let out a slow breath, stepped closer to the humming edge of the bay and spoke like he was digging the words out of somewhere heavy. Starflare wasn't a weapon, he said. It was an ending. The last card in a hand we never wanted to play. They turned to him, faces tight. He continued. Near the end of the Burn Wars, Earth was surrounded. The skies were broken. Cities were gone. Entire continents were silent. The Alari thought we were finished. So did we. A pause. The Caliban hummed in the background like it remembered every word. But humans do strange things when cornered. We built something that broke every treaty, every code. It wasn't just about destruction. It was about sending a message that could outlive fear itself. He looked at the Alari officers now. A single Starflare core could turn a sun into a fist. Kalitha blinked. That's not possible. Vance smiled, but it wasn't kind. That's what your ancestors said, right before we buried 3 of their fleets in a single burn. The silence that followed was heavier than any alarm. Kalitha had read about the burn wars in Academy. The official records were brief, clean, clinical. The Alari called it a minor conflict with an unstable species. They spoke of early human aggression, low-yield retaliation, and a swift return to peace. No one ever mentioned entire systems lost in minutes. No one spoke of ships like the Caliban. But, now she saw it, the lie. The Alari hadn't defeated humanity. They had survived it, and they had buried the truth. Selun's voice was soft now. If the Starflare core is active, what's stopping it from launching? Vance turned toward the ship again. Nothing. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the group. Even Kalitha felt it in her gut, a deep, ancient terror rising from something they were never meant to awaken. Something they had mocked. You said it was buried, she said quietly. How did this ship survive? Vance nodded slowly. After the war, they made a deal. The Caliban would be sealed, not destroyed. Too dangerous for that. So they hid her. Orbital lock, power core disabled, AI asleep, Starflare caged in vacuum, but none of that was permanent. He looked at her now, eyes like steel behind years of silence. She woke up because you gave her a reason. Behind them, a drone sparked and dropped from the ceiling. The bay's gravity flickered again. Several small ships were sliding backward, repelled by the Caliban's invisible field, like the ship was pushing space itself away to make room for something bigger. The voice from the Caliban spoke again, slower this time. Ascendancy presence verified. Primary war memory chains unlocked. Threat response escalating. Final readiness, 43%. Kalitha's hand trembled, not because of the weapon, but because of the memory. The Caliban didn't just carry power, it carried rage, old, coded, and unfinished. Can we stop it? Salen asked. Vance didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. Kalitha turned, issuing rapid commands. Evacuate the bay, clear the airlocks, power down all Ilari tech near the field. Commander? Salen whispered. If the starflare goes critical. Kalitha didn't flinch. Then we'll be the first to know. But even as she moved, her eyes drifted back to the ship, floating, watching, breathing. Not dead, not forgotten, and not done. The Ilari react. The Ilari ascendancy had always believed itself above chaos. Its ships were sleek, its laws perfect, and its people raised on doctrine, not instinct. They taught discipline in their academies, order in their language, and superiority in their blood. Their officers wore white armor not just for tradition, but to show they had never needed to crawl through ash or bleed in the dirt. But now inside Dock 17, chaos had arrived, and it was floating in front of them. The Caliban had said nothing for nearly 3 minutes, but it didn't need to. Every system it touched, every drone that failed, every flickering light was a reminder that this was no malfunction. It was a resurrection. A ship once built by desperate hands in the dark was now awake, angry, quiet, and fully aware. Commander Kalitha stood at the edge of the command dais, surrounded by flickering screens and the rising panic of her officers. Her voice remained sharp, even if her pulse was no longer steady. Is Fleet Command receiving anything at all? She asked. One of the junior officers shook his head. We're cut off, full spectrum silence. Even backup relays are blacked. Then, route a signal through an unregistered path. Pull something from the maintenance grid. I don't care if you use a mining drone, just get a message out. As the crew scrambled, Salen moved beside her, eyes fixed on the Caliban. If it launches, he said, what's its likely target? Kalitha didn't respond. Not immediately. Her mind was already doing the math. The Caliban had been old tech, but Starflare was something else entirely. No one in this generation had seen it used, but the stories, quietly told between military families denied in public, spoke of stars dimming, moons burning like dry leaves. And now the Caliban was moving. Not fast, not threatening, but with purpose. It began a slow turn inside the bay, aligning itself with the outer gates. Salen stiffened. Is it trying to leave? Kalitha's voice dropped. Not trying, deciding. Across the station, defense protocols came online. The docking bay doors were reinforced with plasma seals. Automated turrets emerged from the walls, tracking the ship with red laser sights. On the outer ring, 2 Ilari war frigates changed course, moving into interception vectors. It looked like a proper response. But Kalitha knew it wasn't enough. The Caliban wasn't built for space control. It wasn't a patrol ship or a carrier. It was built to end sieges, built to remind enemies that survival was a decision made by humanity, and not granted by the stars. Behind her, Commander Vance remained still. He hadn't moved since the ship began to turn. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held the weight of someone who had seen the worst parts of history, then kept them secret. Kalitha faced him again. Call it off, she said. You brought it. You wake it. You put it. Back down. Vance gave a slow, shallow nod. I didn't wake her. You did. He walked forward a step, just close enough that the edge of the ship's growing field buzzed against his boots. She's not responding to me, he continued. She's responding to your fleet movements, to your posture, to your silence. Kalitha clenched her jaw. Then tell me what she wants. She doesn't want anything, Vance said softly. She's not negotiating. She's remembering. A cold silence passed between them. Then the voice returned, this time from deep inside the ship, as if echoing through 100 metal lungs. Local hostiles identified. Ascendancy fleet presence. 400 kilometers. Countermeasure strategy. In progress. Kalitha didn't wait. Fire suppression signal, scramble the fleet. I want every available ship outside this station in position. Don't engage. Just show them we're not afraid. Ma'am, one officer whispered. We just proved we are. But the orders were followed. Out in orbit, a dozen sleek ships began to form up. Their engines lit up the dark side of the gas giant like a string of white comets, forming a wall between the Caliban and the Ascendancy capital world beyond. The Ilari were no longer laughing, and yet, as Kalitha watched the Caliban drift slowly toward the bay doors, she realized something terrifying. The ship wasn't preparing to attack. It was waiting to be attacked. Everything it did, the jamming, the slow ignition of its core, the awakening of its AI, was a test, a warning, a signal, sent in silence. And if they failed that test, if they flinched, if a single ship fired a shot, the Caliban wouldn't retaliate, it would erase them. Vance stood beside her now, not gloating, not threatening, just remembering. You called us desperate, he said quietly. You were right, we were. And we built something that only the desperate could understand. Kalitha didn't respond. She was watching the sky now, watching her proud, perfect fleet lock its weapons onto a ghost. They had mocked the bones of a dying enemy, and now the ghost was ready to teach them what it had died becoming. Desperation and diplomacy. For a full minute, the fleet held its breath. In orbit above Oryx 9, a formation of Ilari warships glinted like teeth in the cold light of the distant sun. Their hulls shimmered with defense fields, their weapons charged and locked. From afar they looked flawless, disciplined, silent, efficient, but inside those ships panic simmered beneath procedure. Orders were repeated. Targeting systems recalibrated. Countermeasures blinked in anticipation. Every officer watching the Caliban knew they had never trained for this. This wasn't a drill. It wasn't a war game. It was a test of something, older than tactics. Restraint. Back inside the station, Kalitha stared at the massive blast doors as they began to open. The Caliban had requested no clearance. It simply moved forward, slow and steady, like it had already claimed the space beyond. Behind her, the situation room was chaos in hushed tones, dozens of officers whispering, debating, calculating. Some demanded the ship be stopped. Others warned of overreach. No one wanted to be the voice that gave the command which might ignite a forgotten weapon and carve a star open. Kalitha closed, her eyes for a moment. She could still hear the mockery, the laughter in her own voice, so sharp and proud. The way she'd looked at that ancient ship like it was scrap metal, when it had been a tomb. A sealed warning, and now, because she couldn't keep her ego in check, because she let her officers sneer instead of study, she had woken it. She turned to Vance, who stood with his arms behind his back, as still as a statue. He hadn't spoken, since the fleet moved into place, not once. But his silence was louder than any alarm. His face wasn't smug, it was mournful. You said she's not responding to you, Kalitha said. But she still recognizes you. Vance met her eyes. She remembers every voice that bled on her bridge, mine included. But she's not loyal to me anymore. She's loyal to what built her. Pain. Loss. A line drawn in fire. Kalitha exhaled through her teeth. There has to be a line of communication, something we can offer, something she'll accept. Vance shook his head. You can't bribe trauma, Commander. You can only prove you've stopped repeating it. Kalitha looked down at the floor, not in defeat, but in realization. They couldn't posture their way out of this. This wasn't a negotiation between empires. It was a reckoning between ghosts and the living. And so, for the first time in her long career, she did something the Ilari Ascendancy rarely did. She asked, what would humanity do if the positions were reversed? Vance blinked, slowly, then said, we'd send someone unarmed, and we'd listen. Within minutes, the shuttle was prepared, small, simple. No shields, no weapons, a diplomatic shell barely larger than a cargo pod. It drifted from the station, cutting through the rising storm of sensor noise and jamming fields. The Ilari fleet kept their weapons hot, tracking its course with shaking fingers and dry mouths. Inside, Kalitha sat alone. No guards, no advisors. Just her, a translator drone, and a single datapad. She had insisted. There could be no confusion. She was not bringing power. She was bringing silence. The Caliban responded. It opened a port. Just one. Enough for a single shuttle, as the vessel docked. Her heart pounded. Not from fear of death. She had faced that many times, but from something worse. Fear that she would understand too late. That she had looked down at a coiled hand in the dust and laughed before realizing it was a fist. The airlock cycled open. No soldiers greeted her. No crew. Just red lights and cold air that smelled like scorched ozone and long memories. The interior of the Caliban was unlike anything she'd seen. Worn steel, ancient welds, symbols carved by hand into the bulkheads, names, dates, warnings. This ship had not been built by an empire. It had been built by survivors. She stepped into the main chamber. It was round, hollow. A command corps once meant for 20 officers, now silent. Screens blinked to life as she entered. Sensors scanned her. Weapons locked on, then powered down. And then from a speaker overhead, the voice returned. Ascendancy Commander Kalitha. Stand clear of central platform. Dialogue mode engaged. She obeyed. The center of the room lit up, and a hologram appeared. A woman. Human. Mid-40s. Brown hair pulled back, scars on her face. A ghost. An AI. Kalitha bowed her head, just slightly. I am not here to apologize, she said, but I am here to understand. The AI watched her. No apology is needed, it said. Recognition is sufficient. Kalitha raised her eyes. You remember what we did? Yes, the AI said. I remember everything. A long pause passed between them. Then Kalitha took a step forward and said, not as a soldier, but as a voice from the present. We feared you once. Then we forgot you. We saw your pain and we erased it. The AI tilted its head. And now? Kalitha breathed in slowly. Now we see you again. The hologram faded. The ship began to power down. Outside in orbit, every Alari ship received a single transmission from the Caliban. Message received. Hostility withheld. Judgment paused. For now. And the old warship turned away. The ignition, the Caliban did not leave quickly. It drifted, a slow, deliberate arc through the stars like an ancient predator showing its scars, not to threaten but to remind. No ship in the Alari fleet moved. No order was given to pursue. Commanders simply stared, watching the shadow of a forgotten warship cut across the vacuum, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. But not everyone was ready to let it go. From the far edge of the formation, one Ilari captain, younger, unproven, and drunk on fear, made a choice, without orders, without warning. He fired. A single lance of blue energy arced from his cruiser, clean, efficient, Ilari perfect. It struck the rear of the Caliban, right above the sublight housing. The kind of strike meant to disable, not destroy. The kind of strike that would usually make a relic stutter, vent, perhaps fall silent. But the Caliban did not stutter. It answered. At first, nothing happened. Just silence. Then a pulse, deep, slow, and growing. Light bled from beneath its hull, not in colors the Ilari were used to, but in layered waves, red, then white, then a strange gold that bent the light around it like a ripple through glass. Sensors failed instantly. Communications were severed. Every ship within 2,000 kilometers was blinded. From the side of the Caliban, ports opened, beautiful and terrible. Not turrets, not missiles, reactors. 3 spires unfolded like wings, from its spine humming with impossible heat. The air itself, what little clung to the outer station's shell, crackled. Even from space you could feel it. The kind of power that didn't ask for permission. It simply was. And then it ignited. Not a beam, not a blast, but a flare, A burst of contained starlight, focused into a spiral of color and force that tore a hole in the darkness and filled it with day. The Alari fleet reeled. The shot didn't hit the ship that fired. It passed beside it. But that was enough. The energy disrupted its stabilizers, fried its sensors, and crippled every defense node in an instant. It spun out, powerless, as if the void itself had flicked it aside like a speck of dust. Kalitha, still in the docking station, stood at the viewport. The light of the ignition reflected off her armor, gold and red and alive. She didn't speak. There were no words in her language for what she was witnessing, because this was not an attack. It was a message. The Caliban hadn't destroyed anything. It had simply shown what it could do. A solar forge, Vance had called it once. A last card. A reminder that when humanity had nothing left, they learned how to reshape the stars in their hands. And now the Alari had seen it. Not in theory, not in history, but with their own eyes. Commander Vance stepped beside her. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to. Instead, he asked softly, "How many fleets would have fired if this one hadn't?" Kalitha didn't answer. She couldn't, because deep down she knew the truth. If it hadn't been that captain, it might have been her. The Caliban began to fold its spires again. The flare dimmed, retreating back into its core like a storm slipping beneath the ocean. Its hull glowed hot with residual light, but the silence around it grew again. Calm, powerful, final. Across the ascendancy, shockwaves rolled. In military halls, quiet arguments began. Who gave the order? What should be done? In archives, sealed files were quietly unsealed. Analysts dusted off old blueprints once thought irrelevant. The name Caliban shot across encrypted channels like a curse no one wanted to admit still held power, and on Alari news feeds, footage leaked the flare, the silence before it, the lone human ship standing against the most powerful fleet in the sector, and winning without killing. For the first time in centuries, the Alari citizens looked up at the stars not with pride, but with something ancient and unfamiliar: humility. Back in the docking station, Kalitha watched the Caliban vanish into hyperspace. No sound, no trail. Just a lingering burn in the dark where its engines had been, a bruise on the stars. She turned to Vance. "What happens now?" Vance looked through the glass, then at her. "Now," he said. "Now the galaxy remembers what it forgot. The aftermath and legacy." The stars returned to silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not peace, not even quiet. It was the silence of a room just after something sacred has happened, something that changed everything. For hours, the Alari fleet held formation, their once proud warships hovering like statues carved in regret. The ship that had fired on the Caliban was eventually stabilized and towed. Its crew, unharmed, refused to speak. No one else dared even twitch a targeting system. There were no orders, no counterattacks. Because deep down, every officer, every captain, every soldier watching had understood one simple truth: they were not in control anymore. In the days that followed, the ascendancy did what all great empires do when their illusion of dominance is shattered: they revised. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Defense ministers whispered behind holographic curtains. Military records were quietly amended. On public channels, officials called the Caliban a rogue AI vessel, an anomaly, a historical incident under review. But it was too late for that. The galaxy had seen footage spread, not just of the flare, but of Kalitha's quiet walk into the ship, of Vance's final words, of the way the Caliban had responded not with violence, but with mercy so terrifying it felt like judgment. All across the outer worlds, whispers rose like smoke. Did you see it? Was it really human? Can they still build ships like that? Or worse, do they have more? The name Caliban became a shadow cast across the star maps, not because it had conquered, but because it could have, and didn't. Back on. The station, Kalitha sat alone in her quarters. The white of her uniform felt wrong now, too clean, too sharp, too symbolic of a pride that had cracked. She reviewed the sensor logs again and again. Not because she didn't understand what had happened, but because part of her still couldn't believe it had. The Caliban's flare had not destroyed, it had disarmed, neutralized, humbled, and in doing so, it had made itself more dangerous than any dreadnought ever forged. She recorded a log entry, unofficial, encrypted. Her voice was softer than usual. We built our empire on forgetting. We cleaned the blood from history and framed ourselves as the cure to chaos. But the humans, they never erased anything. They built their rage into metal. They coded their grief into AI. They wrapped their dead in starfire, and they waited, not to attack, but to be remembered. She paused. We laughed at the ghost of their suffering, and it answered not with wrath, but with restraint. That's what terrified me most. Not what the Caliban did, but what it chose not to do. She saved the entry, then locked it in an archive far below the classified threshold, a place where only truth remained, waiting for someone honest enough to find it. Commander Vance disappeared not long after. Some said he boarded a freighter headed toward the Orion Fringe. Others said he returned to Earth, to a house no longer marked on any map. No one truly knew. But those who had stood beside him that day never forgot his silence. The way he had, spoken not like a soldier, but like someone carrying a grave across galaxies. The Caliban was never seen again. Not exactly. But across the next few years, strange reports surfaced. Derelict pirate fleets found torn apart by energy traces that didn't match any known weapon. A Valtari mining moon was spared from corporate bombardment after a ghost signal fried the attacker's nav grid mid-burn. In one sector, a colonial, rebellion was quelled before it began, when a signal broadcast only 2 words, "We remember." And in time a new kind of fear grew, not of war, but of the quiet, of the knowledge that somewhere, out in the dark, there was a ship that burned with forgotten pain, piloted by code and memory, armed not just with a weapon, but with a lesson. The galaxy in its pride had tried to bury the past, but humanity had built something that would not stay buried. And now, in every council meeting, every fleet briefing, every whisper between admirals, one unspoken question remained. If there is one, Caliban, how many more did they leave behind?